as you'll see a little bit later on, is like a little house, a little worker's cottage that's painted green on the outside. But as we come out from under this bridge, again, we're going to get a look at the London House, Chicago. In the United States, some people have called this Beaux-Arts style of architecture, the American version of the French version of the Roman version of Greek architecture. Terracotta on the outside, just like the Wrigley Building. And those four corner temples on the main part of the office block were originally designed to conceal as well as beautify water tanks that were part of the fire suppression system for the building. Down below that building on the riverbank, we have a little outdoor cafe here with these red umbrellas. And at the end of that cafe, Carol Ross Barney, whose office is just a couple of blocks away from here. Each section of the Riverwalk between two bridges has a little bit different design theme and a different intended purpose. The section that we're going to go by next was designed for power boats to be able to tie up and spend some time on the river. As we go under these bridges, though, you'll notice the passageways are built out over the water, over the riverbed, rather than on the riverbank. And that's because these bridge foundations are so massive and so complex, there was no way to create a walkway. Kayakers to be able to easily access the Riverwalk. One has floating river gardens, one has a river theater, another has a big water feature. And because we have all this nice weather, some of the outdoor bars and cafes are still open. On our left now, this tall building with the silver reflective windows on it that has kind of a Parthenon on steroids located on the rooftop, if you will. And this was one of the ways that postmodern architects were trying to add a little bit of new life to buildings after a couple of decades of these very sober modernist buildings. On our left now, this light gray concrete building that, so that more light and air could get down to pedestrians walking beneath these tall buildings. We'll see some more Art Deco buildings along the way that have done this as well. Art Deco buildings tend to have unique shapes. So the 20th century really started out with this very historic European. And we're going to see one more postmodern building on our left when we come out from under this next bridge. It's a building from the 1980s. This one was finished in 1989 and designed by the firm of KPF. So it's on our left now. It has these two tall towers facing the river. Those kind of looks like spaceships or flying saucers are landing on top of those corners. This building sits right next to an elevated train line. That train line goes all the way through Chicago's west side and will eventually take you to Oak Park, Illinois, our closest suburb on the west, where you can still visit Frank Lloyd Wright's home and studio today and see about 20 other buildings he designed in that community. He got his start in the architectural profession in Chicago. Because it had been frozen for many decades, it took 6 months just to thaw out all of the ice that had packed into this building. And these star shapes you see on the brick wall here are caps on steel rods that were inserted into the building after it thawed out to stabilize and stiffen the structure. Harry Weiss also acquired a small piece of land right next to this site, built 4 small townhouses that we call the River Cottages. They have these very steeply pitched roofs, triangle shapes in the rooftops and the balconies, corkscrew staircases, porthole-shaped windows, all kinds of design elements inspired by sailboats and sailboating. Those don't come on the market very often. The last one that sold in the public market was 9 years ago, and it went for $2.25 million at that time. So back in the 1980s, the segment is added to it. The land is usually, as it is over there, privately owned and privately maintained, but the legal requirement is that you must have public access to the riverbank. So over the decades, we're gradually putting together more and more segments of a continuous river walk on both banks of the river downtown. On our right now, another former warehouse converted into loft-style residence building. These are the riverbank lofts, and here, of course, you can see these balconies are not cut into the walls of the building. They're draped off the side, hung from these steel cables. Adapting old buildings to new uses is what preservationists have come to call adaptive reuse. So this is how Chicago and a lot of cities were able to hang on to their buildings people with money, imagination, and creativity can reimagine old buildings that have outlived their original use. So by the DuSable Bridge there, we saw a couple of former office buildings that are now hotels. We just went by a couple of former warehouses that are now residential buildings. And we'll see several more examples of this as we go along. Over on our right, big design style, very simple, geometric, streamlined kind of designs rather than the more naturalistic, realistic designs of the Beaux-Arts era. The main building of the Ward campus is on our right now. This was the original warehouse and distribution center built between 1900, or were the architects for this building rather, and it became an instant icon on the riverfront. Cantilever walls that are built out over the Riverwalk, so the Riverwalk is actually kind of covered by the projected walls from this building. Riverwalk up on the street level, and then this kind of walkout terrace connected to the restaurants. But in this case, the compromise was to design a 65-foot tall overhang above the Riverwalk, and on the riverfront side, instead of dropping these columns, these vertical columns straight down, which would have created a wall, a virtual wall of vertical columns along the riverbank, the building continuously for 10 or 12 chemicals, and are constantly able to refresh and replenish the air as necessary. On our left is another Art Deco era building from 1929. This one has the name carved right on the outside, the Civic Opera Building, designed by Graham Anderson Probst. So in the 1920s and into the 1930s, these heavy stone-covered Art Deco style buildings was really the state of tall building architecture in the United States. Raised them up above these rail yards. And these, in particular, are classic sort of 1960s style modernist buildings, glass and steel on the outside. This very Institute of Technology for about 20 years, and then spent the last part of his life in private practice. So we have more Mies designed buildings in Chicago than anywhere else in the world by far. Over on our right, this white building was one of the first times Skidmore used concrete in addition to steel as a structural material, and the modernists really like to showcase their materials on the outside, so that's a concrete exterior with gray and white paint on it. And the little building next to it is a former commodities trading floor from the 1970s. When it was a trading floor, the traders didn't want any interior columns or obstructions to block sight lines on the floor itself, so these huge X braces you see on the outside, that's all the structural support for the building. They put all the structural support into this exterior skeleton, or an exoskeleton. And we're going to see one more modernist building over on our left. Not super well known for its architecture, but it does have a 400-foot tall analog old school map backup if you're really lost downtown. Over on our right here, we see the old Chicago post office building. No longer a post office. These signs show you some building. And we're going to go under the bridge that supports the highway, the interstate highway and the expressway that runs right through the middle of that building.
Right.
We've been in Chicago for a while. The old post office do tours. It now has a 3.5-acre outdoor landscape rooftop deck with pickleball courts and basketball courts and grilling stations. There's a food hall, pool tables, all kinds of amenities meant to attract people. Out of that wedding cake rooftop at the top of the Tribune Tower. Adrian Smith also designed the Trump Tower that we just passed, and he designed the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Longtime designer for Seymour, Owings & Merrill, but now he heads up his own architecture firm. Financial crisis kind of put an end to that. But now they're reusing the site to develop two kind of smaller towers. The one they're working on now, the 72 stories tall residential tower, and then if that one gets sold out, they're going to build a 52-story tower right next to it. So instead of having one very tall building, there'll be two medium tall buildings.
Just remember, Art Deco is dwarves, Art Nouveau is elves.